as you're coming in, hello, my name is Erin Sweetcharoon. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the grant writer for RTZ Hope. And I have the amazing privilege of coordinating our community conversations with support from everyone on the team behind the scenes. So we're so glad you're here. We welcome you to our community conversation event. This is Educator Stories on Loss. Before we begin, I'd like to share a little bit about RTZ and our organization. The mission of RTZ Hope, if you're not familiar with us, is to offer hope and healing to those impacted by pregnancy and infant loss through genuine connection, holistic support, inclusive resource, and grief-informed education. We offer direct services and resources to bereaved parents, while also providing support and education materials to providers. We invite you to visit our website to access a host of resources, support group offerings, and education materials. I'll be putting some direct links to those in the chat box in just a minute. As part of our commitment to engaging a global community of bereaved parents and providers, this event is provided free, in part by generous donations from our supporters. Please consider becoming a supporter of RTZ Hope and our community conversation series with a suggested donation of $15. You can do this by visiting our website. I'd like to take a minute to acknowledge and thank the incredible donors who are part of the Lighthouse. The Lighthouse is our special group of monthly supporters who help ensure we can continue providing support to the pregnancy and infant loss community, both now and for years to come. Having a sustainable source of support is critical to our mission. To join the Lighthouse, you can click on the link that I'll put in the chat in just a little bit, and we would be so grateful for that support. Okay, just a few housekeeping things, and then we're going to jump into our conversation. To allow for intimate and uninterrupted conversation, we ask you to hold your questions. We won't be accepting questions from the audience in real time, but rather we invite you to put them in the chat. While you're in the chat, we invite you to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about who you are, why you chose to attend, maybe something you're hoping to get out of this conversation. Please add any questions during the conversation, and if we have time at the very end, I will propose those to our panel members. Any questions not answered during the event will be sent to our panel members, and they will respond via email, and then anyone registered for our event will get that email sent out to them. We will also send a recording of the event via email to those who registered, and then please feel free to share that recording far and wide. We would like to get this conversation out. It'll also be up on our website and our social media. We do understand that the conversation may generate the need for support for some listeners. If you need support at any time during the conversation, please reach out to Betsy Winter on our staff. She can be reached at betsy@rtzhope.org, and we'll put that in the chat as well. It is now my true pleasure to introduce our panel. I'm honored that they have agreed to share their stories and perspectives today. As a former educator, this one is near and dear to my heart, and I cannot wait to hear these stories. Our first panelist is Crystal. Crystal is an educator with almost a decade of experience in education in various roles, first as a middle school English teacher, and now as an academic advisor and instructor in the College of Education. Amanda is a professional learning specialist supporting new and novice teachers across the School District of Philadelphia. Previously, she worked as a teaching assistant professor of theater education and an instructor of arts and education at the Department of Curriculum and Instruction at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. Jamie is a special educator in the suburbs of Philadelphia, where she currently resides with her husband and children. Holly Ann is passionate about helping others find hope and joy within their grief journey after she lost her daughter Magnolia. She is also a classroom preschool teacher and former first grade teacher. She is on our staff and will be facilitating this conversation, and we couldn't be more thrilled to have her take over. So I cut your bio super short because I want to hear your stories and turn it all over to you. So Holly Ann, thank you again for facilitating this. Jamie, Amanda, and Crystal, thank you so much for being here. And with that, I'll turn it over to you all.
Great. Thank you so much, Erin, and thank you everyone for being here today. So as Erin said, I am currently a first grade teacher, I'm currently a preschool teacher. I'm a former first grade teacher. And I was a first grade teacher at the time that my first daughter, Magnolia, was stillborn. And that really shaped not only my life, but my teaching career. and it shaped who I am as an educator and how I educate my students now. Um, and at the time, it was very difficult for me to come back to teaching. I I left my students. I was 8 months pregnant, and I came back to them and was not pregnant, um, and did not have a living baby. I wrote a children's book called Some Babies because I found that there were no resources for the general population. Um, and so I found that it was really cathartic for me to write a book, but it was also helpful for my students. And yeah, I've gained a lot of perspective through my experience. I had an early miscarriage 2 years ago, and we named that baby Poppy Seed. And I have a living child named Marigold. So I have three flower babies, two in heaven and one on earth. And my living child is now in preschool, which is where I teach. And so it's been really fun watching her go through this experience and then teaching right across the hall from her. So I'm really excited. This panel is very near and dear to my heart. And I'm excited to hear from Jamie, Amanda, and Crystal and hear their stories. So Amanda, would you like to go next?
Sure. So as they mentioned, previous to my current role, I was teaching in higher education. I had actually just finished my coursework at the University of Minnesota when I was about 7 months pregnant with my daughter, Charlotte. And when I was 7 months pregnant, I was offered a job on the faculty at East Carolina University. So at 8 months pregnant, my husband and I moved across the country to North Carolina. And about 4 weeks after we got there, and about 3 weeks before I was supposed to start this first faculty job, my daughter, Charlotte, was stillborn. So we found ourselves in a place where we didn't really know anyone. And I was supposed to be starting my job basically 6 weeks into the semester after our maternity leave. And I suddenly had to figure out if I was going to start teaching and how I would talk to new coworkers, new students about this experience that I had just had, since no one there even knew that I had been pregnant. And at that time, I was also in the middle of writing my doctoral dissertation, and this experience kind of sidelined my previous research, and I decided to change my research to be about teachers who've experienced pregnancy loss. Um, because my PhD is in curriculum and instruction, I'd had an interest already in just the experience of teachers and kind of the emotional experience of teaching. So I found myself really interested in if other folks who were teaching had had similar experiences to me, um, having worked in higher ed and having previously been a K-12 teacher. And so I ended up interviewing 43 teachers who had experienced pregnancy loss while teaching. So I'm really excited to talk today both about my own experience in higher ed teaching, having experienced a loss, but also to share all the things I learned from the interviews I did with all of my participants in my dissertation, and kind of the takeaways I was able to have from that. So I'm really excited to be here. Thank you, Holly, for facilitating this conversation.
Thank you, Amanda. Jamie or Crystal, would you like to go next?
I can go next. My name is Crystal Oglesby, and like they shared before, I was previously a middle school English teacher. I taught that for 7 years, and then I'm currently in my second year as an academic advisor in the College of Education here at Kansas State University. So kind of have a mix of both public education and then higher education as well. It was in my third year of teaching that I had a miscarriage, was in the midst of COVID and all of those things, and was about 8 weeks pregnant. And we had just started sharing with family and started feeling off one day and just kind of went from there. and was a situation of of situations like that of other people, but you don't necessarily think that it'll happen to yourself, and especially your first opportunity of having a living child. And through that experience, I definitely, kind of like Holly Ann shared, found a different perspective of approaching education, and also just approaching how I interact with people in a general basis, and definitely brought into some questioning of what I wanted to do with my career and those types of things. I had a couple of health situations after the fact that also compounded some of those decisions, and that led to me stepping out of the classroom for a couple of years, at least for now, but still having the opportunity to work with future educators. So I work with freshmen through seniors at Kansas State University, both elementary and secondary, and kind of guiding their experience in their classes and kind of helping them find different opportunities and goals for after graduation as well. So I currently have a 9-month-old. We had our first living child in December of last year. So there was a little bit of redemption to the month of December. We lost our first in December, and then she was born 4 years later at that same time. So there was definitely a lot of mixed feelings in that time period, but that's a brief synopsis of kind of why I'm here and why I'm excited to share my experience and others.
Thank you, Crystal. And Jamie, would you please share?
Thank you. Yes, I'm Jamie, and as Erin shared, I'm a special educator in the suburbs of Philadelphia. We relocated back to Pennsylvania last summer, and prior to that, I was a special educator in Vermont. That's where I was living and teaching when we lost our daughter, Hadley. Hadley's our middle child. She has an older brother and a younger sister. She was born prematurely in April of 2021. So still kind of in COVID times. And I had been teaching in the district for a while. I had a really good support system there. But it still, like you guys touched on, changed my perspective. Um, I remember when I was expecting my first child, a colleague who was also a mom and teacher, said to me that having a child would, um, that was the most important work, and that like I could be replaced at school but not at home. And I feel like I lived that experience when Hadley was born unexpectedly, where like suddenly school shifted and they figured it out and they covered it. But it was a lesson that I didn't need to learn, but learned, and have carried that forward in my teaching since then. I did return to teaching in the same school for a year before we welcomed Hadley's younger sister. And that was kind of where I left on a good note, and then returned to teaching when I moved back to Pennsylvania.
Thank you so much, Jamie. I think a common theme here that we have all talked about is that there was just a huge shift, whether that was in our jobs or our like way of thinking or, a whole dissertation. Just grief changes us and life changes us, and or just like it changes our perspective. And especially in teaching, like, we have to pivot every single day, whether that is a lesson plan or, just I feel like as a preschool teacher, it's like every minute of every day is just like, okay, no, we're changing this, we're changing that. Um, but one thing that I want to kind of ask you about is as you were going through your loss, specifically in the education world or field, what was most helpful for you going back into the classroom? And then as you kind of reflect on this, I will ask you what was the most hurtful. So we can go back and talk about both of those. But if you feel like they're intertwined, you can talk about either or. And I will just open up the floor to anybody that that feels called to answer.
Can start. One thing I think that was kind of a privilege of being in higher education was flexibility after my loss. I was 2 weeks out from the beginning of the school year, and because I was supposed to be on maternity leave, only 2 of my classes were planned, and they were planned for other people who were going to take over. So my director at the time was able to kind of rework my assignment for the semester. So I only had to teach 2 classes instead of 4, and then gave me some kind of administrative work that I could do to kind of fill my teaching load for that semester. And kind of on the flip side, that's something that I found in talking to a lot of teachers is so difficult to get in K-12 that if you look at all of like the management literature, like academic journals on just like supporting um, lost parents in the workplace generally, offering flexibility is one of like the biggest things they say is helpful. That is so difficult for K-12 teachers to access because working part-time, working from home, working a reduced schedule is just really difficult for folks to manage. So that was something that I found incredibly helpful. And I also just was happy to be working. Like I didn't, some people want to take a lot of time off, but I was really happy to have somewhere to go. And I love teaching. So like being with my students and getting to like be kind of in the zone while teaching was actually really helpful for me because it made me not think about my loss. It let me be really in the moment and do something that I felt good at the time where I just felt really sad at all the other parts of my life.
Sorry, Jamie. I would say for me, the support system that I had at school was extremely helpful. It was a somewhat smaller school, but it had been in a school that I had been at for a couple of years, and so I knew quite a few people fairly well on a personal level. One of which was very thankfully the secretary that organizes our substitute teachers for the building. So it was really easy to have kind of that private conversation of this is why I have to be gone. And she was wonderful in helping me find that sub and be somewhat flexible, which I know is not always the easiest thing to do, as Amanda was talking in public education. When I had my miscarriage, it was kind of a extended experience, but started on a Monday and then it was confirmed, I think Thursday of that week. And I ended up only taking off a day. That Friday I took off for a mental health day after things were confirmed and was just kind of a day to step away. But I think the difficult part of that was the fact that I had to make sub plans to be able to be gone to grieve or start to grieve what I was in the middle of losing and what my body was kind of working through at that moment. So I think the difficult piece is just the mental capacity of there's always something more to do in teaching. It's hard to learn to compartmentalize those pieces. It's definitely doable, but it's a skill that you don't necessarily automatically have when you need it. And so I think that's the part that was most difficult was just figuring out like, okay, I've got to flip that switch of I need to put teaching to the side a little bit and be able to be there for myself and for my family, for myself and my husband instead of putting all of my work and not all my effort into teaching. But I would say definitely that support system, leaning in as much as you feel comfortable with the people that are around you can definitely be helpful. And being as honest and vulnerable as you feel comfortable with those people at work can definitely at least give you a little bit of support, especially if you're not able to take as much time off as you might have planned for a healthy pregnancy.
Similarly to Crystal, I feel like something that was really helpful was that I was part of a community where I had been teaching already for 6 years, and I I had a good support system there. They had been my support system through becoming a mom, and then through the second pregnancy. And that, like, it was almost like comforting when I had to go back and I knew people. Something like another piece of that community was that I found before I had to return to work. Hadley was born in April and I took the rest of the year off. And before I had to return to work, I was able to connect with people through RTZ Hope and through other local organizations where, like, I found other educators who had walked the road before me and kind of gave me tips for coming back to work. And one of those things was like advocating for what I needed in an email. And I was able to check in with my principal and I was able to send an email to my colleagues before, like, even walking in the door on day one. And, like, I don't remember what I said, but I do remember that part of it was like, I like, if you feel so inclined to talk about Hadley, I love to talk about her. And if it's not a good time for me or I can't handle it, like, I feel comfortable letting you all know that it's not a good time. And so that felt really good to be able to be that open with my coworkers. But something that was really hard was, like, just returning to work. Hadley was due in July, and the plan had been that I would take off probably most of that year. And so to even walk in the door was challenging, and to do it in a field that is predominantly women who, there are a lot of other people growing their families. It made it really difficult. Um I returned to work when a close colleague was on maternity leave and our babies were supposed to be born at the same time. And that's hard. So
Jamie, I can absolutely relate to you. Both of my co-teachers at the time were pregnant, and they both of their babies got to live, and mine didn't. And it's not that it's not that I ever wanted anything to happen to their babies, but I just wanted mine to live too. And so it's such a tricky situation. And I think that the education field is so unique because educators are often made out to be, you know, you need to be presentable and happy, and you are supposed to come to school. Um, like I often hear the quote that teachers are a work of heart. Teaching is a work of heart. Teachers are there for the outcome, not for the income. Um, and so teachers are made out to look like these saints that don't have any negative emotions whatsoever. And especially if you are in, I mean, this is just like my own experience, but if you're in elementary education or early childhood, like you really are not supposed to show any of that um, negative or like any sadness or things like that. Like it's always supposed to be this happy, cheerful, positive um, persona. And when you've gone through something so tragic, it is very hard to paint on that smile when that is the last thing that you want to do, especially when it's to be in front of a bunch of children, when that's like the only thing you want is a child of your own. Um, and so I would love to know, um, I know Jamie, like you touched on some of this, like um, it being a very female dominated profession. And um, what were some things that as you were going back to school that were very difficult? What were some things that the fact that it was education that you felt specifically because you were a teacher, that made it hard. I mean, I remember thinking if I worked in a cubicle, I could just go and bury my head in my desk and I could just cry and type emails all day and it wouldn't be, a big deal. But the fact that I have to go and sing and dance and teach in front of these children and act happy, um, it just felt so unfair. And especially because kids, especially young kids, they have a lot of questions. And I think kids of any age have a lot of questions and that was hard. So, yeah, what were your experiences returning to the classroom, if any, that were just really stinking hard?
I think, and Holly, you kind of touched on this, I think when you were sharing, like I think one of the things that was hardest for me was the age group that I left. Um, when I left my students, they were fifth graders. I worked in a K-8 building, and I had been with them since they were in third grade or fourth grade. Um, so like they already knew me very well. I guess like it was helpful that it was like during COVID and like our schedules were a little bit more flexible because we were staying out of school like a couple days a week. Um, but I had those students for like a significant amount of time. And when I returned, I was kind of like, I can come back, but I can't come back to the same group of kids because that's just too hard. And um, maybe they'll ask questions and they're old enough to ask questions and I don't have the answers and I can't give them answers when they ask every day or when they ask the first day. And so that was challenging. It was challenging to like have to like leave those students so abruptly without them really knowing what was going on and have no closure with them and then say like I need to be reassigned for the next year. Um, but even though it was hard, it felt like the right thing.
Yeah, I think y'all have touched on a lot of the things that I found. I think the like emotional control is really hard. And I think the having so many distinct populations of people that you have to reveal things to is really hard. So I think with younger kids, it's obviously difficult because you might not, like their parents might not want you to explain the specifics of what happened and get into kind of all of the darkness that could be in that conversation. And I found with college students, I was kind of like, I don't know these students that well and they're 18, 19, 20. So like they can comprehend, but they're also still young enough that like they might not totally understand the weight or the depth of my grief. And so how much do I want to reveal that to them? And then you're also thinking about what do I want to tell my colleagues? What do I want to tell the parents? It's just a job where there's so many different stakeholders where you're like having to reveal a different type of message to all these different people. I think is just a big emotional burden that, yeah, in a job where you just have adult coworkers, you could send the email like Jamie was able to send to her coworkers, and that could be just like the only reveal that you need to do. And in talking to some teachers, some schools had some really odd, even policies that they had to work around, or they um, didn't want the teacher to tell their students anything. So then they felt like they had to hide something, and that's really hard. And I think yeah, schools being a place of pregnancy. One statistic I cited a lot in my dissertation was that teaching is 70% female, and the average age of teachers in the US is 43. So it is just like very statistically likely that there are a lot of women in your building who are of kind of childbearing age who are probably growing their families. And then with older students, I even had some teachers I interviewed who had students who were pregnant, who had, if you're with younger students, there's parents that are pregnant. So it's just people describe schools as just full of pregnancy. And some schools would have like baby showers as part of their mandatory staff meetings. So teachers felt like they couldn't opt out of having to go to a baby shower like really soon after their loss. So those are definitely some like themes that came up in my conversations with teachers as well.
Yeah, I think you all have touched on the big pieces of what was most difficult coming back in. And I think I just want to talk about the fact that even years after a loss happens, like it's still okay for those things to hurt, even if you're in that same situation. Because of all of my medical stuff, we had to wait to try and grow our family again after we had lost baby O in December of 2020. And during that time, I think there were 5 or 6 other people in the building that had been pregnant at least once, if not twice, in that time period. And each time, like, we would get a couple years out from my loss, and I'm like, okay, why is this still frustrating? Why is this still hurt just as bad, or even in a different way, but still impact how I'm able to show up to work and those kinds of things. And so I just want to let people know that even if it's years out from that, that those situations are still okay to feel and grieve, because it feels like everybody else's life is moving on when yours is kind of just stuck in a holding pattern for whatever reason. So yeah, I would echo all of those hardship pieces, but also extend the fact that it can get easier, but it is also okay if it doesn't always get easier.
And I might just tack on 2 other like little anecdotes I heard from teachers, kind of to Crystal's point, that like happened years on of like anytime. One teacher I interviewed said she had a student that had the same name as her daughter on her roll. So it was like every time she took attendance, or like when she first got that attendance sheet, she like really felt that of like, oh, this could have been my baby. And then also the year that your child would have been in the grade that you teach. I had a teacher say like every day I looked out at like the sea of faces and thought like my daughter should be here too. And so obviously that can be years on from a loss, but it's still like there's just those little things that kind of wait to like hurt in a different way.
I think you both touched on such an important piece, and it's that grief does not have a timeline. It goes on forever. And it's going to hit us out of nowhere. And unlike teaching, sometimes we can't plan like sub plans for our grief, and we can't just be like, oh, actually, give me just a second. Let me write like a whole bunch of lesson plans for this, and here's a binder, and you need to just wait, and we can't do that. And so when that like hits us out of nowhere, I know for me it was one day when I had returned after losing my daughter Magnolia. I had planned for all of those like little nuances of, okay, I know that kids are going to ask things, are going to say things. But it was a little girl's birthday, and she um, had come in what I call her birthday dress. And I just knew it was her birthday dress because it was just so beautiful. And that's what hit me the most, was that Magnolia will never have a birthday dress. And it was a moment like that that just hit me so hard. And um it's always the ones that catch me off guard that are the hardest. And so I'm curious for you all, like, what piece of advice do you have? Like, what do you do to like advocate for yourself? Like, how do you handle or deal with those unexpected moments when grief comes out of nowhere? Or even not just that, but like Crystal, you talked about December is a difficult month and a really exciting month. And so, like, as these like certain dates creep up, like how do you honor your baby? How do you, like, if you know that there's a difficult date, do you take off work? Do you tell your students about it ahead of time? Do you send out a newsletter to parents? Like, do you talk about your babies at Meet the Teacher Night? Do you tell your coworkers? How do you prepare yourself and the people around you in the education fields, like to best prepare yourself? Do you not talk about it at all? Do you tell everybody? Like everyone's different. I'm curious to hear, and I think other people would be curious to hear how you navigate that.
I can jump in first on this one. So I actually every year that I was teaching after we lost baby O, I took December 1st off because that was the day that everything kind of started. And I just knew preemptively that it was going to be a hard day. And I was like, I know that I'm not going to have the capacity to stand in front of middle schoolers who are telling me that they hate English all day long. Like that's just not how I want to spend today. So I actually took a sick day every year. And if somebody were to ask, I told them like, this is what it's for. And thankfully I never had an issue with that. And I know that every district is not necessarily the same way. Our district, we got a certain amount of sick and a certain amount of vacation, and we got way more sick. And so after talking with our secretary, she was like, this would qualify as like a mental health type of day, and that makes sense for a sick day. Um, so that was my biggest piece that I felt like was a win for me. Especially previous to my loss, I was very much a workaholic. Like work was my entire identity. And between this and my health issues kind of just rocked what that identity was. And so those were kind of those first steps towards finding that balance of work and grief and family life and that kind of thing. Um, and then also I shared with the people I felt comfortable with. It was during COVID, and the way that our school is set up, our middle school has like 2 teams per grade level. So I work with a group of 4 or 5 teachers pretty much on a daily basis. And one of them I was very close with. She was kind of like a mother figure to me. And she was one of the only people that I told as things were happening that week. And when I took that Friday off, I let her know like that I wasn't going to be there, and the reason why and everything. And then the other people on my team, I didn't say anything to. I just was randomly gone that Friday. And so then everybody was worried, like, oh no, she has COVID, like all of these other things. And I kind of just let them assume that until I came back to work on Monday. And then just kind of told them like, hey, I was sick, or maybe I said I had an appointment or something like that, because I didn't feel like I needed to explain to them. And they didn't really ever question it again after that until I felt comfortable sharing what was going on. So just kind of share what you feel comfortable, and people will either be okay with it or not, but that's not your burden to carry. So
I'm fairly certain that some people that I included on that initial email before I returned to work probably felt uncomfortable. Um, but I feel like that being like open from the start, there was an like overwhelmingly positive response to it, and people like responding back just to me like, hey, we understand, and if you need a space at any point, like stop in, like you can use my classroom if there's no one here, and you can cry if you need to, and I'm here to listen. Um and that was really like that was really great. And I wouldn't say that I took people up on that very often. Fortunately, as a special educator, I kind of had an office space where I could have my moments of grief and kind of keep the door shut and then go collect students when I was a little bit more put together. Um, but you know, I've kind of talked about now I'm I'm living in a different state, and that came with changing jobs. So last summer we relocated back to Pennsylvania. I left this community that I was so comfortable with, that I shared my loss with, and I was in a school where I didn't know anyone. And April is a really hard month for me. Hadley was born on April 13th, and she passed away on April 15th. And that like chunk of 3 days is so challenging, even 4.5 years out. Those are the days that I'm like crying nonstop. But April 1st, it starts. Like I get very emotional. And so I work in a specialized classroom right now. I was able to share it with the people that work with me closest, that like I knew that April was going to be hard and please just bear with me. And they like were so gracious when they could tell like I needed to step away from kids, they would step in. Um, but it's a little awkward when you're a new teacher in a building with probably 90 adults to like on day one be like, oh, here's my trauma and here's my story. So I didn't share that. I kind of shared it sparingly with like my admin first and then with the people I worked closest with. So April was a little bit more challenging, but I fortunately still felt like I had the support and I was able to ask for support. I also, I take Hadley's days off so that I can like minimize the time that I need to either like step out of the classroom or ask for help on those days. So.
I've had kind of a similar experience this summer to Jamie because I left my job in North Carolina and moved to Philadelphia, where I started a new job. And one weird bonus of my dissertation topic is that it's on my resume, and so it's an easy way into telling people that this is something that happened to me. Because even in my interview, my now manager was like, "Oh, I'm really interested in what you wrote about in your dissertation." That kind of opened the door for me to kind of just casually be like, yep, I experienced this loss. And that led to her sharing with me that she had experienced losses when she was a teacher almost 25 years ago. And then that led to another kind of way for me to bring it up in a team meeting with just like my most immediate team that I work with. And I felt comfortable doing that just because they're all parents. Three of them are mothers, and one of them is a father to two young kids. So it felt like a group of people who would kind of, even if they didn't have that experience, kind of understand the loss. But it's kind of nice to have my dissertation is kind of like this work appropriate thing to talk about that then can lead into me having this disclosure of what happened to me. And the timing of that worked out because we kind of all talked about my dissertation, and then I shared my experience in July, and then August 4th is my daughter's birthday, and I similarly have kind of a string of days. August 1st was the day that I found out that we had lost her, and then that was the day that I started an induction that then took 3 days, that she was born on August 4th. So we were in prepping for new hire orientation at our school, which is over 700 teachers for the school district of Philadelphia. So I was not teaching, but I was facilitating all day for our new hire orientation. So I did email my team that morning just to say that like, this is a tough day for me if I like am kind of not as talkative or kind of just need to like do the work and then kind of sit by myself. And they were all super supportive of that. So I think knowing who the people are who you feel comfortable sharing with, and trying to find those safe people that you can ask for support, even if it's just like, hey, at some point today, I might need to just like leave my classroom for like a quick brain break. I think having those people in your corner can be really helpful. And I think just knowing when those days are coming up to kind of give people a heads up that it's going to be kind of a tougher time for you.
I love everything that all of you shared. That was really inspiring and just really sweet, and I think really helpful for anybody that's listening to this. And I know for me, talking about Magnolia, it's been over 4 years out. And so it's not really, I don't consider it to be like trauma dumping, because it's part of like the get to know me. At this point, she is my child, and so I include her. And of course it's taken time to get there, and not everybody feels that way. And there are people that make you feel a certain way that you can feel comfortable enough to do that. And then there are some people that, like, obviously if I'm at the grocery store, like, I'm not it, and they say, is this your only child? Like, I'm not always going to bring up that conversation. But um I don't know, I was getting a lot of really good ideas, and I think even permission for myself, like this year teaching of, okay, maybe I can take that day off. Or, I don't always have to be brave. Or I don't always have to power through. Like, it's okay to just take a mental health day. Um, but I think also it is encouraging to think that, you know what, maybe I could tell my coworkers about her birthday and maybe bring cupcakes that day, or, you know, certain things like that. And so, um, yeah, so I appreciate all of you being vulnerable and sharing all of those things. I hope it helps a lot of people. So we've got about 15 minutes. And so I think as we kind of wrap up, we'll have like maybe one more question, one more thing to talk about. And as we wrap up, I'm thinking about, for myself at least, where I was after losing Magnolia, and sitting there thinking about going back to work, thinking about going back to teaching, and feeling so alone. Because going back to teaching, like we have talked about, is so unique. And I keep thinking about all of the people who are going to be watching, who are watching this video now, or who will be watching the replay, and just thinking about how many of those people are not going to feel alone, or are going to get some piece of advice, or are just going to feel like, oh gosh, I never thought about that, or that's me. And it just warms my heart, because I didn't have that. And, maybe you didn't have that. And to think that now this resource is out there. And so before we wrap up, I just want you to give either like a piece of advice, um, something that you wish you would have known before, going back in, or something you wish you could have told yourself, something you could tell yourself, like before a pep talk, or um, really just anything that you would love to tell the person that's watching this that needs it. Like, what would you say to them?
First, I want to shout out another organization that is really close to my heart. I actually raised money for RTZ Hope and this other organization on Charlotte's birthday in her honor. And that's an organization called Start Healing Together. It's run by an amazing woman who lives in New Jersey, and the whole organization is about supporting teachers who've experienced pregnancy loss or are currently experiencing infertility. And she works one-on-one with teachers to help them come up with a plan of support. She'll work with school administrators, and also does a lot of trainings for schools. She's done trainings for through the New Jersey Teachers Unions, and other things. So that's just a really amazing resource for teachers that I wish more folks knew about, because it's just another way that you can feel less alone and kind of find tangible resources. And there was something else I was going to share. Oh yes. the biggest finding I had from my dissertation, kind of the main point I made, was that like school systems are not set up to give us emotional or physical space to heal, and they lack space for grief and for medical and physical trauma. So I want people to know that if it feels really, really hard to be in a school while you're experiencing a loss or after a loss, like that makes a lot of sense. There's nothing wrong with you that it feels really hard. It's not set up to help you or make it easy, from like taking leave or knowing how to access mental health supports, or um, yeah, being able to have a flexible schedule or anything. It's really, really difficult. But the thing that I found that gave me a lot of hope was that people within the system made a huge difference to the teachers I interviewed. So like having a supportive admin, having supportive colleagues, having a close relationship with students or families, like those things could help what I talked about, like make space for people's grief and make space for healing. So um, really leaning on those people to help you navigate the system, and finding the people who are your support system is what's going to make it bearable. And that if you are someone who's in that system and you know people going through this, like you could be the person who makes it bearable for someone else, by stepping into sub for their class, by helping them know that they could take a mental health day instead of taking a sick day, helping them navigate leave. Like so many teachers said, like, I'm never going to leave my school now because of how supportive my administrators were, my colleagues were. So like if you're someone who could be that for someone else, like that can make such a huge difference.
I would say my advice, I learned both through my miscarriage while I was teaching, and then quite quickly after that, I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer and went through 3 rounds of surgeries in 3 years, and all while I was teaching. And so I think with the mix of those two experiences, both medically kind of roped in there, and then as Amanda was talking about, the system is not built for that healing and that space and that grief. So I think the advice, and I don't know if encourage you is the best word to use there, but teaching is a career and a job that takes so much out of you, in so many different capacities. Of you're on teaching all of these students, in my case was like 120 students a day, and having to have this face of like everything's okay, and that's what I always felt like I had to do, and same thing with my team and that kind of thing. So with both of those experiences combined, I feel like the advice that I would share is it's okay if you don't show up with 100% every single day. We know that the students walking through our door always have all of these other things happening in their own personal lives as well. And a lot of times we're asked to approach those pieces trauma informed. And there's a huge piece to that and a huge success to that of keeping in mind the holistic student that is there. And it's okay to give yourself that same grace as well. It's okay to walk in, and if it's a day where you are filled with grief or all of these other emotions are going through your brain and those kinds of things, it's okay to change your lesson plan to fit what the capacity is that you have that day. It's a situation where, yes, we have the standards, yes, we have the lessons that we need to teach, but if you're not going to be effectively teaching it one way, is it really going to be the best way for those students to learn also? So there's definitely a balance of doing what's best for you and for the students. And it's okay if that shifts on a daily basis of what the capacity is that you have for yourself. And hopefully that capacity will get more as you work through the grief and grief changes and that kind of thing. But especially right after those losses or those traumas, it's okay if your teaching looks different than you really want it to, but you have a personal life that you have to balance as well.
Kind of reflecting on it, I just think about how, as teachers, we're, some of our professional development actually is about like self-care, right? And taking care of yourself. And what does that look like to like fill your own cup? And I think before my loss, I was like, oh, self-care. Like I go home and I watch the TV show that I want, and I kind of unwind, but I was also always like taking work home with me. And like, I don't know, like even with a kid at home, like work was still like a really big focus. And was I really filling my own cup? Was I really taking care of myself? And after my loss, it was much easier, kind of like Crystal said, to like give myself grace. It was much easier for me to say, like, I don't know, talk about my family a little bit more at school and bring home less work and kind of integrate those things in a little bit of a more balanced way. Prioritizing, like, I don't know, like the connection and taking some time from work, whether it was sick time or like over my lunch break, like fostering connection through groups and going to therapy and like I don't know, that kind of self-care as well. Just became so important, and I don't know, really making the time for it.
Well, I'm jumping back in here, and I'm just so thankful for all of you for this deep and incredible, rich conversation. Like I said at the beginning, a former educator, but I experienced my loss outside of the classroom, and I can only imagine, had I still been in education when I had that experience, what that would have been like navigating it. And so I am so thankful that you all, with your rich lived experience, were willing to take the time to come onto this panel to share that with us, to give us an additional eye towards what educators are going through, with that reminder that it is a very underserved, under-supported, under-resourced occupation when it comes to how we support reproductive health, mental health, of those that are tasked with educating the next generation. And so I hope that we've all gotten an insight into what that looks like, and that we're mindful of how to take care of ourselves. If you're going back into the classroom, if you're a teacher here, headed back into the classroom, please check out some of our resources, some of our support groups. You can reach out to anyone on staff, and we're happy to help you navigate that time, and do what we can to support you. For those on the panel, if you have any additional resources or anything else you'd like us to share, as you walk away with this, please let us know. We're happy to email those out. And if you have any questions, please let us know. And I'm just going to say thank you. Thank you so much for all of you for joining us as we wrap up here.